All right, guys. My name is August Schwartz. I'm the art director for What's Up Media, and today we are joined by Christopher Buck. He's the director of Frost Law. Chris has more than 25 years experience in advising clients on business and commercial real estate matters, landlord-tenant relations, and corporate and general civil litigation. Fun fact, Chris is a classic rock enthusiast and a guitar player. We're also joined by Sean Hatley. He's the associate at Frost Law. Sean is an experienced trial attorney, litigator, and business advisor who assists individuals and businesses with commercial and civil litigation, corporate transactions, business counseling, government contracting, and employment matters. Fun fact about Sean, he's an avid golfer and a motorcycle enthusiast. For more information on them, go to askfrost.com. We can cover that more later. We're also joined by Alan Ayers of Lombardo Ayers & Company. He is a managing partner. Alan assists clients with personal, business, and estate planning, financing, business valuation, and litigation support. In his 30-plus years of experience, he has performed accounting, valuation, and CFO services for a wide range of industries, including professional services, government contractors, intellectual property, automobile and motorcycle dealerships, retail and wholesale sales, and real estate development and construction contractors. Fun fact about Alan, he trains falcons to hunt in his spare time. We're also joined by Seth Davis, a partner of Lombardo and Ayers. Seth has over 20 years of experience coordinating relevant tax advisory services that are aligned with each company's business objectives. He has experience serving companies of all sizes operating in a wide variety of industries, including manufacturing, retail, technology, media and entertainment, aerospace and defense, government contracting, financial services, and technology. Fun fact about Seth, he enjoys boating, fishing, CrossFit, playing golf and tennis, and watching sporting events.
Morning, everybody.
For more information, visit lombardoandayers.com. Okay, guys, I think we're ready to get rolling.
Great, thanks. August, do you mind advancing the slides to business operations?
See it?
I think we're still on the title slide. If I'm back one more. Yep, right there. Perfect. Thank you so much for that introduction, August. And good morning, everyone. We're excited for everyone to join us this morning as we talk about a variety of topics with the pandemic as businesses start to open. Just thinking about business operations in this new environment. Whether you've continued to operate or just now starting to reopen, businesses need to adapt and transform operations. So, obviously things aren't going to be status quo. The way businesses operate aren't the same before the pandemic as we evolve through and come out of the pandemic. So businesses need to be able to adapt. And one of the ways companies are going to be able to adapt is to take a step back and perform a SWOT analysis. So analyzing strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
That's correct, Seth. And so one of the things that we have to do is take an inward look at the business and determine, do you have a clear vision for your company? And if you do have a clear vision, do you review that vision on a regular basis? Oftentimes, most people are just trying to get the day's tasks done on a daily basis and really aren't strategically looking at working on their business. They're usually working in their business as opposed to on their business, as Napoleon Hill would say. So when you look at your vision, you need to look and see, does your team and your colleagues buy into that vision? And are you developing a marketing plan and a strategy that is in alignment with that vision? And truly, when you're looking at your vision, you want to make sure that what you're offering to your client or your customer has a unique difference compared to your competition. You would like to look at what you're doing that your competitor does not do.
But it'll give you that opportunity. That's great, Alan. They'll give you that opportunity to really, go through this analysis and identify those things where, what are those differentiators, or can you differentiate, as you evolve through this pandemic.
Sure. So, Seth was referring back to the COVID environment. For example, yesterday I had an optometrist appointment, and for the first time, I spent half of that appointment in my car, getting my temperature taken, filling out paperwork and so forth. And that's just an example of where the physician has had to adjust to the current operating environment to ensure that the patients are coming in the door, that the examinations are being performed, and that the services are being rendered to ensure that the long-term future of the business is going to continue. One of the other issues that we often see in an environment like this is that there are collection problems with most businesses. One of the things that you may need to do on occasion is look to see what kind of discounts that you can offer to your customers for early payment. Oftentimes you may have to remind your customers that they do owe you money. One of my favorite things to do is to call a client if they're overdue 30, 60, or whatever the terms of the agreement are, and say, hey, the kids need shoes, and sure would appreciate it if you would take care of our invoice for the services that we've rendered.
That's right. August, do you mind advancing us one slide, please? So that's a great segue into, looking at budgeting and cash flow optimization is kind of evolved. It's a critical time for many businesses, as we've seen out in the economy. So, a lot of businesses do focus already on budgeting and cash flow, but it's even more important today. So, Alan, just tell us the difference between budgeting versus cash flow.
Sure. So budgeting is what you expect to happen, and cash flow is what actually does happen. And the two often ne'er the twain should meet, as they say. In budgeting, we want to look at, what exactly are our revenues that are anticipated, and what our expenses are that are anticipated. And at the end of the day, when you take your revenues less your expenses, that's what your cash flow looks like. And when you are doing a cash flow analysis, it's very important that we look at the fixed and variable costs of an operation to determine exactly what our operating costs are. Now, a fixed cost is something that you have to pay in order to run the business. And that would be something like rent or salaries. Now, variable costs are the cost of operation that are flexible, such as supplies or the utilities that you pay based on the rents that you're paying and the use of the utilities and so forth. So a fixed cost is something you absolutely have to pay every month, and a variable cost is something that you may have to pay every month. And oftentimes when you're looking at these things, it's a matter of what can you control and what you cannot control.
And it's critical, especially now, to figure out, what amount of cash flow do you actually need to run the business? And that may vary depending on whether, coming out of this, you're at 100% capacity, or you're going to start out, at 50% capacity. So those are a lot of variables that need to be analyzed.
Sure. So, oftentimes when we're looking at these variable costs, a lot of people will first run to their advertising costs and cut that. And what I would say to that is it's generally, if you cut your advertising costs, then you're not getting your name out there. You're not either dripping on people through your email advertising or through your paper advertising, or however you advertise. And in a time of where revenues are decreasing, advertising is extremely important.
And What's Up did not ask us to say that, but the point is, it's really, you want to focus in on not compromising any cost that, or not cutting any costs that compromise revenue generation. It's also a good time to take a step back and figure out along the lines of, what cost do you actually need to run the business, to look at deferring non-essential spending. So it's really looking at what you need versus what you want. Perhaps you were going to, purchase a new line of a particular equipment, deferring that spending until things really get ramped back up.
Sure. And once you've had an opportunity to look at that, you can say, okay, let's look at what some potential other opportunities are for raising additional funds if we need them. That could be a line of credit. It could be a term loan. It could be one of a myriad type opportunities, including the Paycheck Protection Program loan that we're going to speak to shortly. So the next slide, please. So in essence, what we encourage our clients to do is to look at their operational needs in a short-term, mid-term, and long-term basis. And in times such as these, it is extremely important to monitor your cash flows. Cash is king, as the saying goes, and in order to be successful and in order to keep your lights on and to make sure that the employees are paid if you have them, you have to evaluate those fixed and variable costs that we spoke to and look at them on a short-term basis, 30 days. Some people will even do their cash flow analysis on a weekly basis so that they can monitor how they're performing versus what they anticipated, how they were going to perform. That would be the budget. So if you're comparing your actual cash flows to your budget, you're getting a good indication as to how the operations of your business are going in comparison to how you thought they would go. And this is really important because it's very easy, again, for a business owner to get caught up in the operations of their company on a day-to-day basis and not pay attention to the books. And in an environment where you could get caught short on being paid, or you could have a cost arise that you did not anticipate, it's important that we maintain our cash reserves as well as our operational cash as well. We want to do that usually on a best case, a most likely case, and the nuclear option, or as Bush 43 used to say, nuclear option. So what is that? Well, that means, we anticipate, we would like it to be this much. We think it's going to be this much. And if things go really bad, then we have to look at other options, which may even require you to contact a law firm like Frost and Associates and consider, do you want to look at a reorganization of the company in Chapter 11 bankruptcy, or worse yet, Chapter 7 bankruptcy. So again, monitoring the costs and the cash flows is essential to ensure the health of the business.
It's more of a measure twice, cut once approach. I mean, you want to continue to monitor things, and I think the continual monitoring and modeling, looking at those options so you can make critical business decisions very timely. All right. Moving on, August, to our next slide. We wanted to highlight a few things. This could be an entire presentation itself, just looking at different opportunities that might provide some cash flow relief. There are a lot of programs out there. Alan had mentioned the PPP loan program that was part one of this series that Frost Law did. That recording is available if you missed that one. But one thing I just wanted to highlight here is the CARES Act that passed, I guess, 2.5 months ago or so, involves some other benefits that besides the PPP loan One of those is SBA loan payment deferral. So these are non-triple P loans. So if you have an existing SBA loan, the SBA has agreed to make 6 months worth of principal and interest payments for existing SBA loans. The other thing I wanted to highlight as well is this program applies for loans that are fully funded or fully dispersed prior to September 27th, 2020. So to the extent that you close an SBA loan, which would be just a regular small business 7A loan, 504 or a microloan, you could qualify for 6 months of payment deferral. Another item that I wanted to highlight in the CARES Act is employment tax deferral. Now, this is something that was in the CARES Act that originally did not apply to triple P loans, but through some guidance from the IRS and then clarified through the most recent law, even if you have a triple P loan, you qualify for deferral on the employer portion of Social Security taxes. So the employer portion of the taxes that you pay on wages during 2020, you can defer until December 31st, 2021, when half of it will be due then, and then the remaining half would be due December 31st, 2022. So just another way to embed some cash deferral mechanisms through some of these CARES Act benefits. There's also
one thing I would say on that, Seth, is that this is something that I would look at very closely to ensure that if you're going to be deferring those payroll taxes, you make sure that you're saving for a rainy day when the payroll taxes come due, because the federal government wants to be repaid. So when you're looking at this, just make sure you're being judicious and just making a decision not to pay your payroll taxes at this time, because you are going to have to pay them in the future.
So that's a great point, Alan. Further along those lines, there's also a credit available against payroll taxes for qualified wages, 50% up to 10,000, so 5,000 per employee. You're not eligible for this credit if you received a triple P loan. And then highlighting just a few of the tax benefits in the CARES Act, there's an enhanced 5-year NOL carryback. So losses incurred in 2018, 2019, and 2020 can be carried back 5 years. So if you incurred a loss in 2018, you can carry that back to 2013, which is a way to get more cash flow from the tax refunds that you would get there. Moving on to temporary suspension of the excess business loss disallowance rule. Not to get too granular on that, but the Tax Act that passed 3 years ago limited the amount of losses non-corporate businesses could take to $250,000 or $500,000 for married filing jointly. That has been suspended until 2021. And lastly, this is a big issue when the Tax Act passed 3 years ago. Qualified improvement property was designated as 39-year property. So you might ask, what is qualified improvement property? Basically, at a high level, it's any improvement made to the interior of real property that's non-residential real property. Well, the Tax Act made that 39-year property, so you would have to depreciate the cost of that over 39 years. This changes that qualification to 15-year property, which is eligible for bonus depreciation. So the takeaway here is any property you placed in service after 2017 that's qualified improvement property, instead of depreciating it over 39 years, you could take as a deduction in 1 year. So that is quite an enhancement and potentially a way for these things to build upon each other. You could even increase your loss potentially for this bonus depreciation and carry that back to get a refund. So just wanted to highlight that as a great opportunity here coming out of the CARES Act.
Next slide, please. So in summary, this is a great time for us to take a step back from the operation and say, what are my strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and what am I going to do in order to accentuate the strengths and the opportunities and try to solve the weaknesses and threats. In today's environment, we not only have to look internally, but we also have to look externally at the business environment and say, you know, not just what do we know, but what could potentially happen in the future, that we may have to be agile and pivot the operations of the business, like my optometrist did yesterday by having the part of the examination out in the parking lot. What can we do in our businesses to make sure that the operations are going to continue and continue to thrive? Part of that exercise is to look at our cash flow model and to try to be more granular in those models by looking at the short-term, medium-term, and long-term needs of the business as far as cash flows, using a budget to measure the performance on those cash flows, and then the tax opportunities that have been passed as a result of the COVID-19 that we just spoke to. If the business has a loss, it's an opportunity for us to try to make lemonade out of lemons. Nobody likes to have a loss. Oftentimes those losses could be paper from the depreciation cost that Seth was speaking to with the qualified leasehold improvements, but it will give us an opportunity to carry those losses back, hopefully to years where we paid more taxes. And it's good to do an analysis of the prior year's operations if we are going to take losses back, and figure how can we take those losses to recoup taxes in prior years that we paid on our individual income tax returns, that we can now get that money back and use them as proceeds to continue the operations of the business and keep the operations moving forward.
That's a great summary, Alan. And I think, you know, one thing I wanted to mention in that SWOT analysis, kind of your example with the optometrist, is, you know, I think the businesses that are going to thrive in this environment are those that give a very good customer experience, and, you know, enhancing that customer experience, because people are, you know, across the board on, you know, reopening, and, you know, some people may not feel as comfortable. So it's really, you know, focusing your business on giving just a great customer experience in this environment. So with that, we appreciate your time. I'd like to transition it over to our friends at Frost & Associates, where Chris Buck will touch on commercial leases. Chris?
Thank you, Seth and Alan. Appreciate your information. It's great information. And I tell you, after you've gone to your accountant and gotten your information as to how bad or how unfortunate your situation might be, or maybe you're in a good situation, your lease, if you are a landlord or a tenant, situation right now is not great. And I see one note from one of the folks watching asking to address lease spaces, lease for office space. I am going to speak to that, and not from the angle of either a tenant or a landlord, but collectively, because right now it's not a good thing to really be any on either side of that. As a tenant, you're having difficulty paying rent. As a landlord, you're having difficulty paying your bills because your rent's not coming in. So I'll start off with my experience in dealing with commercial tenants and commercial landlords. Is the first and most important thing is to communicate. You have to have some type of communication with the other side. If you are a tenant and you are unable to meet your burden, which at this point in time is not rare. Most people have been somewhat out of business or working on a reduced hours or with reduced amount of employees. I have restaurant tenants who are completely closed. I have tenants in other disciplines who have not been able to make $1 in the last 2 months. I have landlords who haven't been paid in 2 months. It is not a good time right now. So what do you do? The first thing you do is you communicate. You have to tell each other and have an open dialogue, and be as honest as you can, because at the end of the day, the landlord doesn't want to have empty space. The tenant wants to stay in business. If anybody takes a rigid position, the chances are you're going to end up with empty space and potentially filing some type of a bankruptcy or dissolving a corporation or an LLC or something to that effect. So the first thing I can say is communicate. And after you communicate, then there are things that can happen. Restructuring your lease, there has been a lot of talk and a lot of back waiting leases, lease or rent deferrals, rent forgiveness, reducing the rent for some period of time and then making it back up, and to increase over time, not all at one time, because your business isn't going to pick up right away either. You have to do it in a gradual slope. I have businesses that are taking notes and that don't go into effect for 12 months on the arrears at little to no interest. So there are ways that we can do this between deferrals, partial payments, reductions. The PPP loan has helped a lot of tenants to somehow get through the couple of months, but the problem for a tenant is that your business is not going to immediately return to 100%. And as one of the questions that came in, my business is going to be changed forever. Therefore, we have this change of circumstances. What do I do? And the best thing that I can tell you to do is work with your landlord and try and come to some type of an accommodation. All of these tools that I'm speaking of, whether it's a deferred loan, or whether it's rent forgiveness, or whether it's a reduction of rent over a period of time. I have tenants also doing percentage rents. If you are in retail or you're a restaurant, you pay the landlord a percentage of what you're actually making so that it's tracking your recovery. Those are all things that can happen. I'm not going to spend a lot of time presenting today so that we have more time for questions, but there is one thing that has come up, and I get a fair amount of phone calls on this issue, and it's what's called either a force majeure clause or an impossibility of performance. They're two different things, but they somewhat go hand in hand. And in a lot of leases, you will see something that says, tenant, you're relieved of your obligations if some unforeseeable circumstance beyond your control or beyond the party's control happens, and you therefore cannot pay your rent. And epidemics, pandemics, quarantines, things of that nature have been labeled force majeure events in the past, and they have been the subject of many a court case. It depends on where you are. It depends on what state you're in as to how the state interprets those clauses. In Maryland, I think we're going to get a lot of case law moving forward on this particular issue as to what, I guess, rises to the level of a force majeure event. And then what do you do if the event happens? So epidemics, pandemics, disruption of supply chains, transportation systems, labor force, national emergency, a lot of times there's a catch-all that says, or an act of God, or anything that's out of the party's control. Does this pandemic qualify? It would seem to me, in my opinion, that yes, this would qualify as an event that would be such a force majeure event. That's not the end of the story. After that, you have to then give notice, if you're a tenant, to the landlord that you're making a claim under that provision. You have to try and mitigate your damages. There are all types of things that you will have to do that we can talk about one-on-one if and when that time occurs. It is not your free get out of jail card. It is something that a tenant and a landlord will have to accept as a truism in this new world, that impossibility of performance or force majeure happens. And if you are in a business that is closed because of the government saying you cannot be open, you cannot perform, therefore you can't pay rent. In these cases, they are ripe for some type of workout situation. A lot of it, again, if you are not a retail or a restaurant, but you are a practice, whether it's a medical practice, a dental practice, something to that effect, you have been affected greatly as well. The same concepts apply. You just will not be able to do percentage rent as easy as you would with, for example, a restaurant. However, it can still be done. And this is where, we also get the accountants involved, where we look at all the numbers, we look at the documents. You have to be somewhat free with your paperwork and your financials so that you can have a frank discussion between landlord and tenant to try and get to a resolution. Again, it's very state specific as to how force majeure clauses or impossibility of performance is interpreted, from New York, which is very strict, to California, which is very wide open, so to speak, and more kind to a tenant. So in that case, I think I'm going to suggest that you make a phone call to your counsel or your landlord. I mean, obviously, you want to talk to counsel first and find out what your rights are, and take a look at your lease. Specific language in the lease is important. Look for that force majeure clause. And even if the clause isn't there, there's still the impossibility of performance option. With that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Sean Hatley, who is also here at Frost, and let him speak a little bit further.
Next slide, August, if you could. All right, so I have the pleasure of speaking on business interruption insurance. And this is a fitting topic, especially because we're talking about how to deal with business interruptions. And this is just one of the many tools that business owners kind of have at their disposal. And I've been getting a lot of questions, people saying, hey, I have, will my commercial insurance cover the COVID shutdown? And my answer is what everyone tends to hear from an attorney: it depends. And it truly does depend. And we'll get to that. But just briefly, what is interruption insurance? It's going to cover your lost income, as well as some other expenses that you've suffered during the pandemic or natural disaster or some type of disaster or other peril, as the insurance companies call that. And depending on what is covered is going to be dependent on the language in your policy, as well as the endorsements, exclusions, anything else that would come with that policy. You can use it for lost net income, employee payroll, taxes, loan payments, and of course, to tie it in with what Chris was saying, you can use it towards your rent and lease payments. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But again, it depends on the specific language. And that's why I strongly suggest you find either it's an attorney that you worked with before, or someone like Chris and I here at Frost that have dealt with these policies before, can review it quickly and efficiently, find the language we need, or maybe we won't find the language we need. But again, it's worth paying for an hour of our time to look through your policy language and really take a look to see if it's applicable to this situation. Next slide, always. So obviously the business income insurance is the business interruption insurance is kind of the umbrella. And under that, you have your business income insurance, which covers your lost income, the money you would have made if your company had still been operating either at full capacity or operating at all for a lot of these companies. Some of the other portions to that, endorsements and other things, is the contingent business interruption insurance. So if you are a retailer and your wholesaler has shut down, and that's where you get 90% of your products, then that may factor in and may count as under your contingent business interruption insurance. There's also civil authority. So Governor Hogan's stay-at-home orders, that would fall under that civil authority. Usually there's a limited time period, but again, you'd have to see what is in your policy. Obviously, there's the extra expense, which includes overtime for employees, purchasing equipment, and other business costs, temporary office space if your office was shut down. And then also utility services. This is, I think, going to be a little less common for the COVID-19 situation, but though that would cover if your utilities were damaged and you weren't able to get your gas, electric, power, et cetera. August. So what do? Go to your insurance agent, contact your insurer, ask them for your commercial policies. You want to locate that specific coverage or exclusion, and you want to make sure that they don't explicitly exclude pandemics, viruses, other things of that nature. And again, there's something that I didn't put in here, but it's getting the paperwork together. Many of you applied for a PPP loan, so it should not be as time consuming now to obtain all that information, but you're going to need to support the loss in income or revenue or the interruption in your business. And that's going to be looking at your net income, your net sales. For I guess, businesses that have been around longer, it's going to be easier to determine what income you've lost or you were going to lose, because you can look back at prior years, whether it's, you make all your money in June and your business has been shut down for half of June. Things of that nature and that's when you call Seth and you call Alan and you have them kind of help you get your documents together. So when you present it to the insurance company, everything is nice, neat in one package, and it's easy for them to make a determination. One thing to keep in mind is this is not just, hey, I submit my paperwork and I get a check. Insurance companies, obviously don't want to necessarily pay out these policies. So they're going to look for language that excludes pandemics or viruses. And of course, they're going to interpret it in their favor. So they're going to say, well, this may be a little wishy-washy, but the way I read it, it excludes pandemics or viruses. That's when you get us involved and we can have that conversation with your insurance company. Also, lack of property damage. A lot of these policies are tied directly to the property. So if there is no damage to the property, most likely it'll be excluded. However, some people have been getting creative and saying, well, if the virus is on my property, it's damaging the property. Whether or not that'll work with the insurance company just depends on a case-by-case basis. Also, stay-at-home orders lifted. Once those orders are lifted, it kind of limits the time frame of your damages, which is a good thing because you can get back to business, but also be mindful of that when making a claim for your business interruption insurance. And also, in the same vein, filing a claim, make sure you pay attention to your policy language to determine what's my deadline to file my claim. And that's going to be key, because if you wait on it, the insurance company is going to say you were required to notify us right or within 30 days of your business being shut down or something along those lines. And I think from there, it's important to make sure okay, I need to get this paperwork in, within the next few days to at least have a shot at hopefully finding some coverage. August, next slide, please. All right, I'm saving the fun stuff for last because I've been getting a lot of calls from business owners saying, listen, my employees don't want to come back to work, or my employees are afraid of the COVID-19 virus. What do you do? And the one thing I want to kind of, before I dive into the substance is, when people come to us, and especially being a litigator, you fix problems. And what I find with people is they say, okay, I can do this. I can figure it out myself. And it's like when you were a little kid at the beach and you're digging your hole in the sand and you get there and you're like, all right, I've almost got this done. And the walls collapse and fall in. When that happens is usually when people come to us and say, hey, I tried to do this, here's what happened. Can you fix this? That's why I think it's really important to address the advisory side of things. And come to us early. If there's something that you feel brewing with your employees, or there's something that you're just not quite certain about, call us. We may be able to answer your question in 5 minutes, or most likely we're going to need some more information to determine that. But give us a call and we can kind of help guide you through this, because everyone's navigating this at the same time. And lawyers are navigating this, accountants, everyone is trying to figure out what to do based on the laws we already have in place, as well as the new laws that have been instituted. So getting into that, start with, you got to understand your employees' rights. And that is kind of the first step here. And I'm not going to spend too much time on the Families First, the Coronavirus Response Act, because there's been a lot of webinars on that. And now that businesses are starting to open back up, it's more important to figure out, okay, how do I get my employees back to work? How do I do it safely? And how do I handle issues that arise in the workplace related to the COVID-19 pandemic? So really it's a very intensive factual determination, but you're looking at those facts through the lens of the different statutes that are in place. And you have the Americans with Disabilities Act, you have the National Labor Relations Act, the Occupational Safety and Health Act. And when looking at those, so we'll start with the ADA. If there's an individual that has an underlying illness or disability and they request, or let's say they have asthma and they're an older individual, or there's a serious illness that they have that makes them extremely susceptible to contracting COVID, and they ask for reasonable accommodations to complete their work. So they want a at-home setup. You just talk with them, figure out what works for them. And some people may not be able, their job may not lend them to that, but you need to kind of figure out how can we accommodate this individual for that. So, and they must have an underlying health condition that puts them at risk. And that can be verified by a note from the doctor or someone that you can request they provide you. And another thing is employee privacy. Is if someone does test positive, you can't necessarily disclose who it was, but you do need to make sure that the other individuals in your office and your customers are aware of the situation and the steps that you are taking to remediate that. And again, call us if you have any questions as to specific situations. We can help you walk through it. Unionized and non-unionized employees join in protected concerted activity. So if employees all don't want to wear face masks, or they all want to wear face masks and they refuse to work until everyone has to wear face masks, that can be considered protected concerted activity. So there's different things that can happen there. I would try to read up on or call us, and we can kind of help you determine what's going on. Then you have the Occupational Safety and Health Act. If employees refuse to come to work, just because they have a generalized fear of COVID-19 doesn't necessarily give them the right not to come to work. If there's a specific fear, if one of their coworkers that sits in the cubicle right next to them tested positive or had symptoms as described by the CDC with a sore throat, fever, things of that nature, then that's a very specific danger. And if you cannot address that, then that's an issue. But they need to have a reasonable fear of an imminent danger. And with that, you look at, can I address this? Can I move the employee, or can I put the infected employee or the individual with those symptoms, can I put them on leave? Things of that nature that give you some flexibility with how to. But these are some things to keep in mind when you're running your day-to-day operations with your employees. Next slide, August. So some of the common situations that we've been having some phone calls with people about and other things like that are my employee tests positive, or they've been quarantined, or they've been tested for COVID-19 but haven't gotten their results back. Employees refuse to come to work due to fear of COVID-19. We addressed that a little bit there. Employee tests positive for COVID-19 while continuing to work. And then also the one that a lot of people are dealing with are employees refusing to return to work while on unemployment, because frankly, a lot of these individuals are making more on unemployment, so they don't want to come back to work. And we'll touch on that. But when it comes to employees being tested or quarantined, it's important to make sure that you're protecting not only understanding that employee's rights, but also making sure you ensure the safety of your other employees. And that's where that's where your policies and your procedures come into place as well. So if someone tests positive and they continue working, or they were working and the next day they find out they had been tested positive, having the procedures in place to say, okay, I need to make everyone in my office aware. I need to make any customers that they've come in contact aware, but retaining that employee's privacy to make sure that you're not violating any of those other statutes and laws governing that. Next slide, August. So as an employer, what can you do and what should you do? Number one, just as Chris said, communicate with your employees. Send out weekly letters or a monthly letter instituting your different policies And things are going to change. It's an ever-changing landscapes, but communication is key. Making your employees aware of what they should be doing if they have symptoms, or what they should be doing if they need to request time off from work. All of those things. Communicate. Again, implement new procedures and policies for a safe work environment. Masks. Some firms are putting up plexiglass on the cubicles. Checking temperatures of employees as they come into the building, and you can require that the employees be tested, their temperature be tested before coming into work. You can also have them self-test at home and report their temperatures, things of that nature to make sure that you're and sanitizing the office. There's a lot of services out there now that are doing that. We'll come into the office and take care of that for you. Document complaints and concerns. If an employee has an issue with coming back to work, document it, have the conversation, just make sure there's a written record, depending on what you need to do next. Depending on what kind of company you have, I would suggest being flexible with leave for the time being, just given the landscape. But if you can't, there are some other ways to kind of work through that. Encourage remote work if your business lends itself to doing that. I know some people find themselves more productive at home than they do at the office, or vice versa, but encourage remote work if it works for you. And then also address employees that refuse to come to work and evaluate their concerns. If you can fix it, if you can make them comfortable, that's great. But you might have to be creative in how you do things, and it may take some time to kind of think through this. But definitely evaluate what fears they have, what their concerns are, and address them, and of course, document them. And that's all wrapped up. We got August. I think we have a Q&A session next if people have specific questions. But we thank everyone for their time in listening to us drone on. Hopefully, it was informative and at least got you thinking about what you should be doing moving forward. And we'll be happy to answer your questions.
Does anyone have any questions? It looks like, Chris, did you cover the lease thing from Jennifer?
I think I did. If Jennifer has any other questions, I'm welcome to ask.
No, she says she's good.
She's good.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, yep, I think we're good to go, guys. Thank you for your time. We can get in touch with you guys at askfrost.com, correct? Correct. And lombardoairs.com as well.
Correct.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank everyone for listening. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Be well.